Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Africa is Home Global Podcast. Today, our topic of discussion is going to be the African culture and traditions. So, joining us today, we have my good friend here, Mr. Ben, who happens to be a model, and he has worked with a lot of Africans here in the United States of America. And we have Mr. Nas, who is the CEO and founder of Flexi Africa. He is currently marketing a lot of African cultures out to the world. And then we have our brothers from Kenya, Mr. Jasper and Mr. Williams. Both of them co-founded Discover Africa. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
All right, let's dive right into it. So our first question of today for you gentlemen is, how is the African culture impacting the growth of Africa? Discover Africa, you guys can take the lead on this one. It's like everybody's just waiting.
Let me take on. Let me take it.
Yeah.
So, let me first introduce Africa. Africa is actually, I think, the motherland. Everybody knows Africa. It's termed the cradle for mankind. I think the earliest remains of human beings was found in Africa. Africa has a population of around 1.4 billion people with an median age of 19.5 to 20 years. These are very productive population.
Mm.
Basically, I think I can say it's the most productive continent in the world if properly used. So, according to the question, if culture and tradition, how it's grouped, it's growth and stability. For example, we can say when it comes to culture and tradition, just like you guys, just like Ben there, like Nas over there, everybody has their cultures from where they come from. Culture makes you who you are. You are your roots. And the moment you lose your culture, you lose yourself, you become something else totally, which has no direction. So basically I can say African culture and growth and stability. I pointed my views based on when Africa was Africa, when African communities and countries were really practicing their African traditions.
Mm-hmm.
This is before the civilization and westernization, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to say that we're going to take if Africa was stable back then. So the question we're going to answer is, was Africa stable really before civilization and Christianity? Because those are the two key things that have eroded the African culture totally.
Mm. So before colonization, is that correct?
Yeah, before colonization and before missionaries, before Christianity.
Right.
We started with was it colonization and then Christianity? And then
Yeah, it
Africa
was
gone.
colonization, then Christianity.
And then Africa was gone.
Mm.
So before those two things happened, Africa was one of the strongest, and I believe it still is, in terms of resources, in terms of economic stability, in terms of peace, in terms of political structures.
Mm-hmm.
We had kingdoms in Africa. We had empires, actually, to literally say that. For example, African empires, for example, the Kingdom of Kush in the north of Sudan.
Mm-hmm.
Which to show how strong it is. You know Egypt, guys. Nas, you know Egypt. Egypt is not because of its. I think it's the eighth wonder of the world, pyramids, right? Yeah. So back in the days during the Kush Empire, this is back in the 15th, 14th century. Sudan, the northern Sudan was so developed to a point of it has over 200 pyramids more than Egypt. They were so good at trade, they were so good at political peace, they were so good at creating, what are they called, cities and towns and stuff. There was also another kingdom in Tunisia called Punt. There was another one in North Africa called Carthage, which was so strong enough to, actually they're called the Roman Empire was afraid of this kingdom, the Carthage of North Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Keeping in mind that the Roman Empire was, and I think it was still the strongest kingdom to ever exist. And then there was, for example, there was the Mali Empire. The Mali Empire, everybody knows the Mali Empire. This produced the richest man in the world up to date. The richest man in the world came from Africa. He was so good at organizing its people, organizing trade, political stabilities. So if we can say, if you base all those things, he actually had universities back then. There was the most sophisticated mosques and buildings and universities were found in the Mali Kingdom. So basically, if you check this stability and what we now call stability, Africa, when we were holding into our culture and into our traditions, we were, I think, far more better. When it was just us.
So let me ask this question.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, there's no doubting, right, the very rich history of the continent of Africa. So many histories all over different areas of that country, right? What are now countries, I should say. But post colonization, and I would say now in modern times, what I hear from a lot of Africans who are now in the States, right, is that after getting an education and wanting to give back, it's difficult in modern time to form a company there or even to find employment there under a lot of the modern job market. So my question, I guess, to the group is what's the solution? What's a way of turning that around in the modern climate to make it more business centric and a better place for employment nowadays?
It will depend first of all, the education system in Africa is borrowed. Personally, I've undergone an educational system that is, I think it's Britain's, it's UK's, yeah? Practically, we lost our original, what are we called? How do I put this? How our grandparents were educated is not how we are educated. People came in, saw our shit, then said, this is shit, take this. Something which we had never seen, something that nobody even knew.
Yeah.
And we were forced to take that, and now we use that. So we are trained for a job market that we don't know even if it's there actually. That's why the rate of unemployment in Africa, it's
recording
almost,
in progress.
It's almost at 45% of all the labor force in the continent. Because you go through a system that was brought to you by people, they are training you for a specific purpose. A teacher will be trained from the beginning to be a teacher. And then when you finish school, there are over 1 million of you are out there now applying for a single teaching opportunity. I think if you are to capture this labor force in Africa, you have to be diverse. You have to bring something that is relating to Africa. You have to be, I think you have to make your product or your business more African. You have to make it relate with us, capture us, talk to us in a way that it won't sound foreign, it won't sound new. And then I think it will be easy to go.
Yeah, to add to that, Mr. Jasper, another thing to that I will tell you, Mr. Ben, is this problem in Africa is because education in Africa, we are not studying the African reality right now. Yeah, we go to school, we learn all these theories, and we don't get practical. These are not realistic in the job market in Africa right now.
Right.
Yeah, an engineer in Africa is not able to build a road. Yeah, and we need roads in Africa. You go to school, agriculture is not even in our curriculum, and that's one of the highest things that the people in Africa need right now is food. So we are studying things that might be realistic in the West, but not in Africa. So we have to define everything, not just only education. We have to define the culture, tradition, politics, democracy within the African realities before we can be able to even move forward from there.
That makes sense. And what do you think can be the incentive? Because we see so many really skilled and educated people coming out of Africa and contributing so much to the West, right? So much of even people I work with in technology, the medical field, everywhere we see people from Africa contributing and improving the West. So what can be an incentive, for them to stay in their homeland in Africa and actually contribute there and help build up that economy?
Ben, you've talked about Obama just a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
He's Kenyan. So, like, if you look at his footprints and what he has achieved, if you were here, some things like those would never happen. If you read African books, if you're good at reading African books, the likes of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the likes of Chinua Achebe, those guys write about the African culture, the real roots of African tradition. But they live in USA or UK. They're not even in Africa right now. So, like, when you say we can change this,
I think it starts from the government, though. The only way we can even try to begin to address changing these situations in Africa is gonna start from the government, because yes, they come out here, the story. Somebody has to be responsible for bringing them back home and making them comfortable.
Right.
Yeah, they can just you're not just gonna abandon your $350,000 job annually and then run to Africa where there is no job for you, where no one wants you, where the infrastructure is poor and the living standard is down.
Right.
Yeah, it starts with the government. If the government officials can sit up and take the role of making it easier for people to go back home, then there will be a possibility for the future in that domain. But anyways, gentlemen, again, let's try to stick to the African culture and traditions. Ben, I know you want to learn so much about Africa. But let's stick to the African culture and tradition. So, okay, my next question was going to be like, the West have such a huge impact on the African culture and the tradition right now. And we have seen this, a lot of people now don't even want to do our customs and traditions back home. They call it archaic, ancient. So, Mr. Jasper, what is your take on that? Do you need me to repeat myself?
I'm back again.
Yeah, I was asking about the Western influence on our culture and traditions is increasing every year. And it has gotten to a point where a lot of Africans don't even want to participate anymore in our customs and traditions. They call it is uncivilized and it's archaic. So what is your take on that?
For me, I can say the Western culture, I can say I can say it has some negative influence in that you find like the way the people, there's the way the African people are supposed to dress according to their customs, but by the Western influence, you find their way of dressing is not quite good. So I can say it has some negative influence, like on the mode of dressing and yeah. I guess William, you can. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I get it. So Platini,
Yes,
if I may come in. So Western civilization has both positive and negative impact on the African tradition.
Yeah.
And mostly I can say personally I usually take it as negative because they made us lose ourselves. They made us lose our identity. Because when it comes to culture is how you live, how you eat, how you dress, how you relate with people, how you almost wake up and live. That is culture. And during when these Western forces moved in, they changed all that. People would come in and find you eating ofufu, and they'd be like, "No, this is shit. Can you take some bread and some other stuff for the morning?" People would come in and find you wearing some good African attire, and they'd be like, "Yo, you wearing some dead animal skin? Can you put on this other stuff?" People would come in and find you wearing that African shoe, I think, and then like it impacted the African culture in a way that we lost everything, and it was pictured as bad. The African ways were pictured as bad according to that civilization, of which we don't know of which we people who are practicing it, we know it's good, because I can't come to you right now and start telling you how bad that microphone is. It's yours, it's you who use it. Then I bring something else more like a pen, and then I start telling you this is amazing. So I think the African culture, as Western civilization, has had and is still having a very big impact on African culture, and it's making people lose their ways, even to the way buildings are built today, the way it's called urbanization is happening today. We are trying to emulate cities in China, cities in UK. We are trying to create things which are not our own. If I may put you into perspective, right? In traditional times, there used to be droughts and stuff like those, but we used to worship our gods in a specific way. There used to be something called, I think Ben has never had this, it's called rain dance. It stays for rain dance, yeah. So when it goes for like a season without rain, the chief of the community will take you, they sacrifice a goat, and then you dance for rain for several hours a night, and believe you me, you'd be chased from that dance by rain.
It worked. Yeah.
It would rain instantly. So shit like that is not happening anymore. You try to do that and people will start telling you, yo, you are demonic, well, you are doing something to it. This is because of something which came to us a few years ago, 100 years ago. Christianity is only 100 years old in Africa.
The West... is the West somewhere where culture goes to die? Because I think about the States, and the States has become so diversified with every different possible culture and people coming from all over the world. I feel like maybe it becomes hard to maintain your individual culture based on where you're coming from, right? They call it the United States the melting pot, which that has great advantages to it. Of course, having such diversity, I think, personally, I think that improves our culture, or improves not just culture, but even economically. That improves everything within a country to have more diversity. But I can imagine it's coming from somewhere with such strict or deep customs that it can be hard to maintain once you're inside this country of so many cultures clashing with one another.
It's easy to lose your identity here. It's easy.
Yeah. Platini, you can relate with this. Back in the days, Africans had communal land. Nobody used to have like, this is my acre of land, this is my piece of land, or shit like that. People used to help each other. I think it's capitalism or something like that. It's the opposite of that, right?
Ubuntu.
So, like, I would be having food in my house. Platini does not have food in his house.
Absolutely.
It's a guarantee he would never sleep like that. He would not sleep without food.
It takes a village.
Right now today, Ben come into my house and say you want to eat at my house for 1 week. You're gonna pay. That is how it is.
That's our way, and that's probably why we welcome the Western civilization so hard, because we are very welcoming. That's that's the way we are. We are very welcoming. So, Mr. Nas, so far, do you have any follow-ups?
So I think just to trace a little bit back and very quickly. So I think in Africa, in pre-civilizations, they did have war, but it was more on a tribal basis, right? It was more tribes more than anything. There was a lot of consistent welfare, and I need to really be careful how I word this. But I watched the other day the Ugandan president voting against the homosexual marriage in the Ugandan parliament. And one of the things he said is that we are going to protect our children, we're going to protect the way we customs, and we're going to protect our traditions. Basically saying that we don't want that Western influence of human rights, and they disguise human rights under a banner of a lot of things, which I won't probably get into. But it's very, in my honest opinion, it's very hard, it's very sacred for the Africans to uphold the customs and traditions and not to be influenced by anyone, really. It doesn't have to be the West, it could be even the Middle East, but they do that at the expense of profit. Profit is big, okay? When companies want to maximize revenue, you're talking about a continent of 1.4 billion people. It's a big market for businesses, and it's basically untouched.
Right.
So, of course, the Western nations will be coming to Africa, will change the way they dress, like was mentioned before, the way they do their hair, right? Most of it's now Chinese products now, and most of the clothes are Chinese clothes. But why are Africans wearing Chinese clothes? They have beautiful, authentic fabrics, cowhides, cotton, silk, all these beautiful materials that can be made, hand making African clothes. You can be buying from African businesses. You can helping African families by spending your money in African businesses, but they choose to buy Chinese clothes. So the Africa has the ability, it has the minerals, it has the raw materials, but they don't have the education to manufacture, and they don't have the platform to do so. And that's the problem with Africa today.
That's interesting. So you mentioned the position of the Ugandan president. So is your point, do you think that some of those traditional views held, I guess I could call them traditional lifestyles in Africa are preventing corporate interest or business interest from wanting to enter that market?
Well, it depends where the business is situated and what sort of business it is. Like, I'm not going to comment if it's bad or good, right? There are some traditional values that are good, and some traditional values that are bad.
Right.
But I don't necessarily think they are preventing. But what I am against is exploitation of the African people, paying them minimal wages or close to zero, basically. And when a company is employing people and you work, and in Australia we say OH and safety, like the health and safety regulations of the company is poor, the pay is very poor, they barely have enough food to eat or feed their families, and their company is making hundreds of millions of dollars. That is what I'm against. Traditional or no traditional, it doesn't really matter. The moral of the company is wrong. They shouldn't be doing that in the name of profit. Because at the end of the day, what do companies want? They want to minimize expenses and maximize profit.
Absolutely.
And they're doing it at the backs of the African people.
Right.
It's not good, and it needs to stop. And I'd like to see the African countries coming together. Now, if you look at East Africa, the East Africa countries are booming. Tanzania is booming, right? Absolutely booming. This president, she's doing an amazing job. She's getting rid of corruption. She's basically saying to the West, all right, if your operations are in Tanzania, you got to pay your taxes, and you got to raise the minimum wage, because we're not having it here in Tanzania. The Tanzania is doing very well. Zambia is doing well. Zimbabwe is slightly improving. Ghana is doing well. Kenya is doing well. So we're seeing that shift, and that shift is able to happen because of education. We're seeing this Pan-African talking. We're seeing this Pan-African collaboration. We're seeing inter-African trading. And I hope we see that increase in the future.
All right. My next question to you, Mr. Nas, was going to be, like, you are the CEO of Flexi Africa and the founder of Flexi Africa, which means you marketing Africa to the world. How is the world responding to the African culture?
They view African culture as a very foreign thing, right? Because I'm not sure how the attitude it is in America, but here in Australia, when you say Africa, you think of a far distant place. Ooh, it's over there, I'll never go to Africa, because the problem is, right, the Africa that we perceive, growing up, and I can speak on behalf of a lot of my friends in Australia, we see Africa as a very war-torn place, right? People live in tents. It's a dirt, it's a desert. There's not much to Africa. It's so funny because now that Sudan conflict that we're seeing, they're showing the worst bits of Sudan, right? Like this is the dead bodies on the street. And it's really bad what's happening, but the media is very selective in what they show. Now, to answer the question, people's attitude is based on what they see in that media. They can't formulate their own opinion on Africa because they have no experience of Africa whatsoever. So when I sell my products to the West, they'll be like, all right, number one, this is very foreign to me. I'll never wear these colors. But at the end of the day, you're not exporting a product. You're exporting culture. You're exporting a story. Most of my products on my website, it tells you a story. When a mum of 6 kids and the dad is, passed away from war, disease, or whatever, right, has a beautiful clothes, just telling a story. And this is absolutely significant. And that sort of vibe doesn't go very well in the West. They just want to buy cheap products, they don't give a shit, right? But when it comes to the Eastern cultures, especially Africa, right, you're setting story and you're exporting culture. And Flexi Africa, the reason why my logo is an African woman with a traditional head tie, right? Because the future, in my opinion, is going to be African women. The African women are going to be in leadership. They're going to be in businesses, because at the end of the day, they treat businesses like their own family. Okay, where men tend to be a little bit more selfish, and I see that the attitudes of Africans are going to be heavily formulated with African women in leadership, especially in business. And you see what's going on in Tanzania. Now, the Tanzanian economy, I think it's the second lowest economy, and she's a woman.
Yeah, they just gain like $10 billion in their economy in just a short while. I think in about 5 years, they just gain about $10 billion in their economy. Their GDP just
and she wiped out corruption.
Yeah.
A lot of it's coming from the West. A lot of it. She wiped that out. She's like, we're not having you in Tanzania. You stay here, you're going to pay your taxes. You're going to pay 30% company tax. And that's how it should be. None of this, you pay zero tax. But so why do you think China is so expensive, so successful in Africa? They come to countries like Zimbabwe and Zambia and Botswana and Namibia. Namibia is trying to do a neat split, but they say, look, come to our country, you pay zero tax without even hiring locals. They bring Chinese workers over at the expense of what? Raw materials, minerals, cobalt, lithium, gold, silver, bronze, copper, whatever it is, right? So it's the Africans sort of need to start waking up and think as a collective society rather than individualistic, because the West thinks individualistic. Africans tend to think very communes.
Okay.
It's a commune-based continent where people think about each other. It's always been like that, or it should be like that.
Mr. Nas, when you told me that, Mr. Nas, when you told me that Flexi Africa was just to market African products to the world, one of the things that I thought about was this is gonna be a challenge for you because of the way of the way the media currently portrays Africa. It makes people think like, okay, these products will not be good. Africa cannot produce anything good. So far I've seen Flexi Africa. I'm seeing the growth of Flexi Africa, which means I was just scared, which means 100% I was wrong. So what advice would you give to other people that are interested in getting into the African culture and exploring the African culture the way we have exploited the American culture?
Yeah, good question. Market research. Do your market research before you invest in Africa. Market research is very, very important. You need to know if there's a demand in the product that you are selling.
Yeah.
And the infrastructure in Africa, unfortunately, is not the best. And it's not e-commerce friendly. The banks, some of them don't accept Forex. A lot of the banks are still paper-based. Now, the banks in Zimbabwe, I started my business in Zimbabwe. I had to leave Zimbabwe because they were giving me so much headache of what they were doing. So I moved over to Tanzania instead, which is still behind, right? Zimbabwe is 30 years behind, Tanzania is about 10 years behind, right? But it's still improving, okay? But the advice I do is that if you're a guy from the West and you're going to Africa, prepare to pay 300% more. Because as soon as a white guy walks in the shop, the prices go up like that. And, obviously, we get paid well in the West. Obviously, they will take advantage of it. I'll probably do the same resort if I was living in Africa, to be honest, but, do your market research. Infrastructure is pretty bad. Make sure there's demand on products and people buying the products. Because when I created Flexi Africa, and I think you know this from my first interview in Africa is Home, I had a very hard time African businesses actually signing up on my website because Africans didn't know anything about logistics, right? Like if I saw this book, right, Looting Machine, which is a good book by the way, it's about African Western invention in Africa. If I live in Kenya in the robbery and I saw this book to a guy in Denmark or Sweden or Finland or whatever in Scandinavia, how am I going to send this? What's the price of this little small book going to Denmark? How can I determine my pricing? If I sold this for $20 US and shipping is $80 US, I'm not going to send it. But what happens to me as a platform? I lose a customer, I get a very unhappy customer, and I get a very bad reputation. So a lot of his vendors don't know e-commerce and they're not very educated about e-commerce. So it's sort of going back to basics. In Africa, you go back to basics. And I'm not saying it's a wrong thing, but it takes a lot of time and it's very expensive.
You can't rush it. You can't rush it. You can't skip steps.
You can't rush nothing.
Yeah, you gotta do the work. So it's like Mr. Jasper. It's like you had a follow up.
What is that?
It's like Mr. Jasper had a follow up for you before I interrupted. Hello, Mr. Jasper. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear. I'm keeping following on this on us. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think William. Sorry, William had a question.
Oh, was it Mr. Williams? Sorry.
Yeah, William.
I wanted to talk about the way Ben has said about starting businesses, like bringing businesses in Africa, and the way Nas has put it out.
Yeah.
If you are aware about Congo and what is going on in DRC, it's the most resourceful country in Africa. Just so
100%.
much resources. It's just so much resources to a point of it can feed Africa on its own for a century or so.
Mm-hmm.
River Congo can produce enough hydroelectric energy to power Africa as a whole.
Yep.
That's one river only. And if you've seen what I don't want to mention names, but the Asians, can I say Asians? They are mining gold. They are this company mining gold.
Yeah, Asians. They're there. Is it something we're hiding? The world is seeing it every day. They're mining gold.
They are Chinese. I think basically they are Chinese companies that are mining gold in River Congo. These people are hiring kids. Kids don't go to school. Kids are getting paid nothing. And Congo today, it's one of the poorest countries in Africa. Because of, people are coming from out there, they are starting businesses here, but under what conditions? What is their motive? Why are you really basically coming to Africa to start a business? Are you here to loot, to get what you wanted? Go. These kids are basically mining gold every day from morning to evening. Gold is one of I think it's the most wealthiest metal in the world. But they are the poorest people in Africa. Why? These are businesses from out there. Yet they are employing and misusing people. They are paying people peanuts while they are making the large bucks.
Yeah.
You know, Congo has this mineral
as well. Go on Google and type in lithium fields in the DRC Congo. Lithium fields.
Oh, that's the new one that they just discovered? Is that the new mineral that they just discovered that light up bulbs?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you literally have children mining lithium in these lithium mines, right? It's absolutely disgusting what's happening in DRC, and it's sad that the world doesn't cover it. And the reason why the world does not cover it is because these phones have lithium in it. The battery is made from lithium. Lithium literally controls the solar materials and everything. The iPhone, the gentleman's hiding, it's a big shut up. No one talks about it, right? Because this is very expensive. Right? It's economics of scale. How much can I sell things at the expense of children mining lithium?
Well, if they regulate that, Mr. Nas, if they regulate that, what will happen is modern technology will definitely have a problem because even these airplanes, before they fly, they need that.
No, it's not the fact that modern technology will have a problem.
That is why they are not talking about it. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's very wrong. Yeah, but the West is terribly quiet.
But for example, in Australia, we have lithium fields in Australia, but the reason is it's expensive. We have laws in Australia, right? You can't come here. You can't employ people under 16. You can't pay minimum wages. I think it's $28 or something. Australian dollars is a minimum wage. So you can mine lithium here, but the cost of this is going to be double, right? Because the parts of the phone it's gone up, especially the lithium battery. But they go to Africa because they don't have a government or a stable government. They don't have laws. They take advantage of the lithium fields. And I don't want to mention any names. I don't want to mention any companies. But they export those lithium so they can make this very affordable. And the company makes a crazy amount of profit. How much do you think this phone costs us to make? Seriously, fucking peanuts, man. Absolutely peanuts, right? But they do that at the backs of children that actually, you can go on Google. It's not a conspiracy theory. Like, If you type a lithium,
Oh no, the information is out there.
It's
It's
not-
out there. I think everybody knows that already by now. You have seen child labor in DRC already, right?
DRC, yeah,
Yeah.
but the one place you'll never see it is in cable news, in the mainstream media.
They can't.
They
Of
can,
course not.
Yeah, they cannot.
because they'll be going against their own sponsorship.
They're going against the elites. They don't want to do that.
100%. They'll be going against their own sponsors.
Yeah.
That's what it is. They all look after each other.
You know, I heard that it's so
That's
bad
like-
there that even the roads that go to the mine are not fixed. So the planes land direct there. And they
and
just
where-
load them.
and where-
And then they just leave directly. They land there, they load
And
them,
where
and
do
leave.
you, and where do you hear news like this, like the actual truth, in platforms like Discover Africa,
Mm-hmm.
in platforms like Africa is Home?
Mm-hmm.
This is why I like to appear in platforms like Discover Africa and Africa is Home, because they tell the truth. You guys are on the ground. I was on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you actually see these things in first hand. You know, if I was open to criticism or open to a broader understanding of what's happening in Africa, I'll be very oblivious to what's happening in Africa.
Right.
I'll think of Africa, like I said before, some foreign distant land. It's war torn, and people live in tents, and and that's it. That's Africa. So this is why it's so important. In platforms like Discover Africa, it's exciting to see. You guys are approaching 800,000 members on your Facebook page. That's a serious number, 800,000. That's huge, and that's from people all around the world. This is why that we need young Africans, we need young entrepreneurs to actually stand up and say, this is the real Africa, this is the problem, and we need to do something about it. And this is the answer to that. We can't sit down and complain. We need to have some solution, and this is a solution. So it's refreshing to see so many young Africans actually doing stuff.
Thank you. All right, my next question is for you, Mr. Ben. You have had a
Yes.
chance to work with a lot of Africans out here
Mhm.
doing your modeling events. So what is your take on our culture?
I mean, it's honestly inspiring, if I can be honest. The young entrepreneurs that I've worked with in the Twin Cities, it's in many ways a different attitude than what you get. And so I've worked in tech for coming on 10 plus years. Worked, as you mentioned, as well in the fashion and the arts here in the Twin Cities. And there's no more driven group that I've seen than those folks coming, from different parts of Africa. And we're actually somewhat spoiled here in the Twin Cities with the diversity that we have. As you know, it's a major African influx of African immigrants that have come to the Twin Cities.
Mhm.
Surprisingly, right? Out of all the places in the United States they could go, they come to Minnesota. And that's in large part because of the economic opportunity here, as well as some of the programs that are offered, right? We get a large number of refugee status, whether it's coming in places like Liberia. They began coming during the 90s, during that civil war. The latest wave being the Somali population over the past, decade plus. During the civil war in Somalia. And so we get to see firsthand here in the Twin Cities just how, like I mentioned before, just how skilled, how talented and well educated this population is. And as I mentioned before, that is a major contribution to our economy in the States. I mean, city-wise, state-wise, and nationally, it's a major contribution to our economy. And so that's what I was getting at prior when I mentioned, what's a solution to bringing that productivity back home to Africa as well? Because we, like I said, we're benefiting from the skills that they're bringing. But back to your original question, right? It's what makes, I believe it's what makes the arts and business so great. In Minneapolis, not sure how familiar you are with the scene in Minneapolis, but it's a very great art scene, music scene, and it's also become a very big business hub. And I think we can attribute that in large part to the diversity that we've built over the years.
And I can second that as well because I can say a large portion of my US customers are actually from from the area that you're currently living in,
Yeah,
which is Minnesota as a broader region. So I
right.
get a lot of customers buying products from there, and most of it's African attire, which is quite interesting. And I have a question, right? And I hope there's an appropriate answer for it. But just very quickly, like for example, me living in Australia, and ethnically I'm Middle Eastern, and when I see Middle Eastern refugees or people coming to Australia, I help them out. I give them jobs. They can work for my company. We help each other, right? Do you see that trend in America where African Americans are actually helping Africans?
To be honest, from my personal experience, because I'm an African that have moved to America, now there is like this big gap between African Americans and Africans. I think it's more of like how they have portrayed both parties. Because before we come here from Africa, one thing we're thinking is African Americans are all on drugs because of how we see them on the media, because of all of this. And then when you're coming out here, half the time your parents called me, like I had a conversation with my mom. She was like, okay, now you're going out there to school and to build your life. You should definitely know people to avoid. And I know exactly what she was talking about, because that's how they portray them to us. And then on the flip side, they make us look to them like we are archaic, we are uncivilized, we are rude, we don't know anything, we are dirty. So they kind of stay away from us. And I think that is very strategic. Now that you've mentioned, I think it's very strategic because I think the Western world, right, they know that if we were to unite with African Americans, that equals hard work and capital. That's the rights of Africa. And that is a problem right there.
100%.
Yeah.
I would agree completely with that because and I think, to be fair, I think it's improving.
Yeah, it's changing.
In recent years, I think that relationship is improving. But I've seen, as I have many friends coming, immigrants from Africa directly, as well as, African American families who their roots in this country go back hundreds of years. Far back than my own. Right, I've been here. I'm only third generation American. And so I've noticed this tense attitude towards one another between the African immigrants and the Black Americans, right? And to your point, I think it's a total misconception.
It's a misconception.
I think it's based on lies that we're told by the media. That as you mentioned, right, that African Americans they're
they don't know how to behave.
All of these things. All very, very false information. And then they look a certain way. I think they look a certain way at Africans coming in and feeling that they have this privilege that they can just come in, start businesses, be very successful.
I've heard that too.
And I've seen firsthand that it's much more challenging than that.
Yeah.
The grandparents of my daughter, who came from Liberia during that civil war that I mentioned, they came to the States. They were surviving by working, 12, 14-hour shifts, standing at Walmart, for, all day long. That's how they started. And to them, this was an opportunity. So it's so much about perspective, right? To them, they're coming to this new country. They have this new opportunity in front of them.
Where they can work and get
where
paid.
They can work, and they're not in the middle of a civil war, right? And they've worked their way now to where they are homeowners. They've created opportunities for their children to really succeed. And so it's certainly there's no advantage, for immigrants coming to this country and having to start from nothing. But it's also important that we acknowledge, right, for the Black Americans who go back generations, they feel as though they don't have a home. Whereas for African immigrants, they consider the U.S. their second home, right? That your real home will always be Cameroon,
100%,
right?
yeah.
And so this is a second home to you. For the Black Americans, there's a feeling that they were never given a true home, because we all know the history, right? They were taken away from their land hundreds of years ago. They were stripped, brought to this place as slaves, never given equal opportunity. Not even to this day. There's still modern day slavery in so many forms that we could get into, but these children are being, they're born into poverty, raised in single mother households, and opportunity for them is also very, very challenging. And so it's that misconception, I think, between the two groups. But
and just touching on what you said as well, I think it's very important. The Black Americans, especially the African Americans, they carry names that's not their names. They're Christians, but they're not supposed to be Christians. They speak English, but English is not really their language. Yeah. So they've lost that self-identity that's originally from Africa. And if you listen to guys, look, I'm not a fan of him, and putting the religious things aside, right? Like, I'm not a fan of him, but like guys like, for example, Louis Farrakhan. All right, I'm not American, but if you hear some of the stuff he says, he always says, and he emphasizes that it's very important to go back to our roots in Africa. Right? Like, we invest in Africa. We connect to the homeland of Africa. And he sort of encourages, like, a lot of young Black Americans to go back to Africa. And he used to do a lot of trips to Africa. He was good friends with Gaddafi. And Gaddafi as well, he was a bad man. But one thing he did want is to unite Africa together. The United States of Africa. He wanted everyone to trade in one currency, which was the African dinar. Right? So he emphasized African unity to an extent that no African leader ever did before. All right, so but it is interesting to see that bridge between African Americans and Africans, because the way that we perceive African Americans here in Australia is through entertainment and movies, and that's it. It's either shootings, it's either Tupac or Ice Cube or whatever it is, right? And it's very thuggish, very gangster-like, right? You're the Bloods, you're the Crips, that's it. We don't see enough educated African Americans here in the media. We don't perceive that in our end.
Right.
So I think it's quite interesting, that bridge of difference.
I think you're very right, Mr. Nas, because I always tell people this, that the African American culture, which of course when they say the African American culture, they're relating it to entertainment half the time, or that they are either sports or music. I always tell them that this was developed on what they had, and what they had wasn't enough. It wasn't a lot. Yeah, because they like you said, they went and took them out of Africa. Most of these people, they couldn't practice our ways here.
Right.
So they had to craft it from somewhere. They had to do something. And this is what they were able to come up with. Yeah. But they need also to realize that Africa is not a jungle. It is not a cave. They need to go back there and learn their ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Find
themselves. They need to go back there. If you are out here, you reach your African American, go back home and find your way. Get to know your people. It's just peaceful. All of them that I've seen that have gone to Ghana, Ethiopia to visit, or South Africa, they always tell me that I went there and it was so peaceful.
Right. For
the first time in my life, I felt like I really belong somewhere. That someone is not looking over their shoulder, making sure that I'm not trying to do something,
Yeah.
People didn't even know that I was different. I just belong in there. I told them, that's not the difference between you and me. I've lived like that for 21 years, feeling free. So it's very difficult for me to stand here, and when people tell me that you're being discriminated, you're being marginalized, I'm like, I don't really see it.
Right.
Yeah, because me, I've not felt like that my whole life. Right. I just know that if I want a loan, I'm gonna walk into Chase Bank and ask them that, hey, this is my document. I need a loan for this business. If I want to do this, I just go. But you are thinking that they're not going to give it to you because you're black and you're standing in the back. Sometimes you lose opportunities too like that, because you have to take that step to know if for sure they will give it to you or not. And that's one of the reasons that we succeed here when we come here, because we come here like men on a mission. I'm coming here to build, and building is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
You get up every day, you go do it. Even if you go to door A, it says no, you go to door B. We can't deny institutional racism. It exists for sure.
Of course.
But we are not, Africans are not driven by that.
No, absolutely.
And it's quite funny as well, because like most of the things you're saying, it's all perceived, it's all perception, right? It's the way that we perceive it by the media. I'll give you one example, or I'll give you a few examples. Like if you look at the world map, the African continent is actually much smaller on the world map than it actually is.
It's way too small.
It's very small, same as Russia, right? but they do that deliberately to play with people's minds, to say, oh, look, it's smaller than he actually is. But, mate, it's a bloody big continent. And look at Kenya, for example, right? The only time I hear the Kenya on the news was that terrorist attack that happened a couple of years ago. They killed, I don't know how many people killed, but that's the only time you hear Kenya on the news, terrorist attack. But what about the thriving economy? What about the booming tourism? What about the investment opportunities, right? You don't hear nothing like that. You don't hear the beautiful safaris they have in Kenya. I've been to a lot of them. Unbelievable, the best in the world, right? You don't hear nothing like that. But you'll see a terrorist attack in Kenya, right? It's absolutely disgusting how they portray Africa, man. It's delusional and it's not right. It's not really fair. But again, maybe they see it as a threat. Maybe they see African unity as a threat. That's what it is.
It is not maybe, it is a threat.
Totally.
It is a threat. Because when you look at a country, for example, the United States of America is okay. Yeah. The only reason Africans feel like this new rising BRICS is going to be better for us than the United States of America is because the United States of America is with NATO. That's a whole different conversation for another day. But when you look at a country like France, right? France have built their economy, their living standard is directly related to Africa. The entire France. So if Africa was to unite now and have one currency, one government, and set those rules now that control trade in favor of Africa, a country like France will probably go down.
Platinum, I think the only person in Africa who had such a dream was Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi had these ideologies about uniting Africa into a United States of Africa, introducing one currency. He had the plans to start
It was one bank, one currency, United States of Africa.
It was
digital currency. Someone in Africa raises up with such
Mr. William, your network is disturbing. So basically, yes, he's talking about Muammar Gaddafi's vision for Africa. Actually, that vision is not Muammar Gaddafi's. Let's be honest. That is Kwame Nkrumah's. Kwame Nkrumah was the person that introduced that. Gaddafi was just acting on what Kwame Nkrumah started before he died. He was just trying to continue with what Kwame Nkrumah started. Kwame Nkrumah, he wrote a whole book about that. On ways for us to change Africa. He was the one that introduced United States of Africa, one currency for Africa. Then Gaddafi was just trying to get that done. Of course, Gaddafi was willing to act on that, but you know how the stories end. Sometimes when they talk about how Gaddafi was a bad person, I really ask people, was he really? Or was he bad to NATO?
Or was he a threat to the West?
There you go. That's a question I ask every time.
I think the problem with Africans is sometimes things happen to us and then we go like, yeah. You see the way we are, was he bad? And he's done. He's already gone.
Okay. Look at Libya now. They said he did that. Look at Libya. You guys have the freedom you have. Look at your country.
Exactly. Look at Libya now.
Look at Libya.
It's a playground. It's a playground for terrorists right now. Absolute playground.
That's why we need money.
At least when Gaddafi was the leader, there was a government. There was
order in Libya. There was
no
order.
government and there's no stability. It's absolutely.
Mr. Nasir, something I always say. I always say this. Gaddafi was like my father, because when my dad provides me everything I need for school. He provides me food. He provides me clothes that I wear. Yeah. I'm not allowed to ask him questions. Yes, you know this, Mr. William. You know this. Your father, you don't argue with him. That's why I tell Africans, be careful with what you wish for. Our cultures are different.
Exactly.
In our household, it is dictatorship. There is no democracy at home. It is dictatorship. If your dad says, come here, you come here. Go, you go. We also have kings in our village that acts like that.
I think when you
that's our ways.
The chief.
Saying that Gaddafi overstayed in power, for example. The guy Nasson mentioned a few minutes ago, Museveni. How long has he been there? 8 or 9 years.
The president of my country, Paul Biya, has been there forever too.
Then if you can deal with Gaddafi, why can't you deal with Museveni? A country like Eritrea, since independence 1993, they've never had a democratic election. The same president who started in there 1993, the same guy who is in today. But Gaddafi, because in Libya, I think he had ideas, there were resources. I think there's oil in Libya. In Uganda, there's bananas.
Oh no! Don't get this wrong. Uganda just recently discovered gold. Don't just wait. NATO is coming to Uganda. They just discovered gold in Uganda. A lot of gold.
They
A
have,
lot.
they have discovered a chunk of gold somewhere on the northern side, but let's see.
The West is coming. Uganda needs freedom. Eagles are flying.
Museveni must go after 40 something years. When Gaddafi stayed for only 20 something years.
So I have another question for you, Mr. William. So we are relating this to the African traditions and the customs of the African people, right? Before we kind of like generally just cover everything about Africa so far. That's what we've just done. So, what can we do to prevent to protect our ways from Western influence? Hello, Mr. William. Can you hear me?
Getting you.
Yeah, I was asking what can we do to protect our customs and traditions?
I think my network has issues. I haven't switched my phone.
Hello, Mr. Jasper, do you want to take that question or are you back, Mr. Williams?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right, I was asking what we can do to protect our customs and traditions from being diluted by the Western influence.
I think the first question we need to answer as African is, do we still have those customs? There are very few communities in Africa today. Almost, let me talk about Kenya. There are over 54 ethnic groups, but very few practice their traditions. Today, we get circumcised in the hospital. People back in the days used to be circumcised by their elders, by the river, and then were told how to be a man. Today, you're being circumcised, and nobody is telling you how to be a man or how to behave to have been circumcised. I think in a way, we are defeated. In a way, it's hard. It's hard to protect whatever we have right now. Because as a matter of fact, 90 to 95% of African artifacts are outside of Africa. So basically what we're trying to protect is the remaining 5%. If it's about the practitioner about it, I don't know, it's hard because it's like chasing a goal. It's something that has already been gone with the wind. So we can start tutoring people, you can stick to the roots, but it's hard. I think we're defeated already. Personally, I think we're defeated.
So I have a question regarding tradition.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know it depends on the region and the tribe. But if a woman tells me that it's a 20K dowry in order to marry her, should I believe that, or is she just is she messing with me?
20K, like $20,000.
20K, but I mean, my real question, right, is which cultures are still maintaining this this dowry system?
Every culture, honestly. You're not gonna go marry anybody in Africa that you don't pay dowry.
But I've heard
But
I've heard from West Africans, like Nigerians,
Nigeria,
that they're not
Cameroon,
really, that it's not
everywhere.
really that you know, even back home, that it's not really you know a tradition that they really stick to so much anymore. It's more how should I say it?
Did they just say Nigeria? They're lying. Whoever told you that they're lying, I'm telling you.
Oh, yeah?
You're not gonna marry no Igbo girl or Yoruba girl or Hausa girl and you don't go do the customs right with their family.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no. Whoever is telling you that they're lying.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no way. Everywhere in Africa, that's one of the few cultures and traditions that we are holding so hard to.
I had to ask it, yeah.
No, traditional weddings are done all over Africa. There's no way you marry any African without a traditional wedding. So yeah.
You can give me 20 grand if you want, man.
Well, what will I get back?
So his network is really
That's an
disturbing.
offline discussion.
So on this preventing of culture thing, I've seen a lot of African households now in America, and their children don't even speak their own languages. They speak English. Some of them are even taking Spanish in school, but they cannot even speak their own languages, and they're so proud of it. It's so sad to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so sad to watch. How are you gonna adopt the English people's language, and then you don't teach your own people your own language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard that some parents even will try to push their kids to speak only English.
Yeah,
so
they do that.
so that they can blend more into the schools and everything. And yeah, I agree. I think it's sad. It's too bad that they're losing sight really of that cultural heritage.
English is a world language, of course. It's good to learn it.
And let me comment on something as well, which relates to this topic. Because I lived in Zimbabwe for about a year and a half, and obviously
recording in progress.
And joining Zimbabwe, right? So we're doing business in Zimbabwe. You sort of have to like impress the elders, right? The tribal chiefs and all that. And when they give you the head nod, sort of, you can go to the communities and get your business. Like that's Zimbabwe. Some parts of Zimbabwe, it's still very traditional. But they always told me, go to Sunday church. You go to Sunday church, you meet the whole community. It's a good platform to meet. But one thing that I found fascinating going to Zimbabwe, in the rural areas of Zimbabwe, is that you go to a church and you sort of see the whitest Jesus picture hanging all around the church. And this is in the middle of rural Zimbabwe. Now, again, like, I'm a Christian, but in the Middle East, we don't see Jesus as white. Jesus is not white, is not painted white in our churches. But if you go to rural Africa, he's blonde hair and blue eyes. Why Jesus is not blonde hair, blue eyes? Jesus looked like me. He was from the Middle East, right? So this whole, I'm not going to say white supremacy or anything, but this brainwashing that occurs, it is so misleading. It's actually not funny.
Yeah.
Like where are the black angels? Where's the black Jesus? Like even in the Bible, it says that Jesus had his feet was bronze as brass. You know, like he was a brown to black man. Like and this whole implementation of this whitest Jesus you find in this rural area of Zimbabwe, and you ask yourself why? Because the reason why is because the Western evangelicals, right, are coming to Africa with the big money, building these mega stadiums, building these mega churches, while the people are starving, literally starving. But they're building faith, they're building hope, because faith and hope is big business. You control people by faith, you control people by hope, right? And you bring them all on Sunday, and you get this white preacher saying all these stuff, and put a little bit of money in the box and pray for us, and come every Sunday, bring your friends, bring your family. The whole church is filled, and they're all hungry.
Yeah.
So this is not good.
It's propaganda. There's no other word for it. It's propaganda that they're bringing to these people. And as you mentioned, we know historically there's Jesus. We know was a brown-skinned man. There's no way there was some random blonde white man walking around the Middle East during that time.
There was no Caucasian dude in the Middle East.
It's not possible.
Walking around preaching.
Another good clue is that his name is Jesus. Have you ever met a white guy named Jesus?
Jesus.
But
I mean, the Bible is describing Jesus himself.
Yeah.
Right in the Bible. That is not white to me.
So my question too is
Jesus' name was Yeshua. His Hebrew name.
Hebrew name, right. So question, I mean, kind of bringing it back to something Mr. Nas, you had mentioned in the beginning, I think, right? The Christianity that is, that has been forcibly spread through Africa, and how is that intermingling with actual African tradition? Because I think of something like the example you mentioned of the Ugandan president taking that stance on homosexuality and that certain group of people. Would that be something attributed to evangelical Christian values or to traditional African values, or is it kind of a mix of the two?
Let me take this one.
I think it's traditional. I reckon it's traditional African values. I reckon it's the culture.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, religion is part of culture.
It's the culture, and even way before religion, right? Traditions, African cultures and traditions, strongly stand against that.
Okay.
Yeah, because and even though the Western culture is all over Africa right now, when you still go like to the villages in Africa where everything starts out, we still hold our values strong. Like in my village right now, in some tribes where I'm from in Cameroon, we have a king. That king says we should do something, and then the president of Cameroon say we should do otherwise, we will always go with what the king says over the president.
Okay.
You understand?
Right.
That is a fight that the West will lose every day.
Right.
That is a fight they can never win.
So
That is a fight they will never win.
Tribal values, you would
It's
say.
the tribal values. They are going against our fundamental rights in Africa. That is a fight they will never be able to win. Even if you go and put it on paper that this is legal in Africa, the day to day, the way people are going to treat them every day, they're never going to be welcome in the society.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a fight the West will never win.
Understood.
Yeah. And then again, add on the Christian values. All African societies now are either Muslim, Islam, or Christian. That's the thing. There is no house that we don't have atheists in Africa. I heard that word here in America when I came here.
Atheists.
No, we do not have atheists in Africa. You're either Christian or Muslim, period. And everybody holds it dear to their heart. We live in harmony somehow. Yeah, we respect the Muslims, they respect us. There's no way that will work in Africa.
Right.
And it's funny because Christianity and Islam both didn't come from Africa.
Yeah, we borrowed them.
Okay, we borrowed them. So that's another thought of process. How how influential foreign schools of thought has in Africa. It's amazing. And again, how did Christianity and how did Islam spread in Africa? Most of it's from warfare, right? They killed so many people by the sword, and they converted so much people in Christianity for this false sense of hope. I was reading the book the other day. It's very controversial what I'm saying now, but they actually, like this guy that I was reading, I won't mention his name, but he was actually writing an essay, and he said the reason why Jesus is painted white as a very Protestant thing was because he taught the Africans to submit to the slave master when they went to the United States, their white slave master. So they automatically adjusted their God as white. So when they went to America, the guys who owned the slave masters were actually white. They had this idea of this, listen to this white man, right? And their God is white. All the angels are white. Everything good is white. And the clouds are white. And everything bad is black, right? So it's just this very psychological thing that was embedded by them, for them, by the outside, foreign influences.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're running out of time here, gentlemen. So let's let our gentlemen from Kenya advertise their platform before we call it a day. Mr. Jasper, can you hear us?
Yes, I can get you. I can say the conversation is quite flowing, quite good. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, we have lost my friend William, but he will join us shortly.
Yeah, no, it's time for you guys to advertise your Discover Africa.
Sure. So about Discover Africa is the largest social media platforms helping people from diaspora and from Africa to know more about the Africa continent, the culture, the people, stories about Africa, news, latest trends. Sure. Also, we give people a platform where they can interact. They can interact and know more about what's happening around Africa. Yeah.
All right, thank you guys so much for doing such an amazing job. We need to keep pushing our culture, our ways, and the beauty of Africa out to the world. The world needs to discover Africa, like you guys rightly said, discover Africa. The world needs to discover Africa. There's just so much that nobody knows about Africa that we really need to educate people. You gentlemen, imagine that I've made people here that think Africa is a country. Some of them think Africa there's Africa, then there's Somalia, and then there's Nigeria. Imagine, we are talking about 2023 now. Somebody still thinks there's Africa, then there's Somalia, and then there's Nigeria. So thank you guys so much for doing this amazing work and putting it out there like that. So yeah, thank you gentlemen so much. And it's sad that Mr. William is not here for towards the end, but hey, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Ben, and thank you so much, Mr. Nas. Thank you guys so much for having this amazing conversation with us.
Thanks all.
Having us, thank you very much.
Great talking with you guys.
Next time.